Yeah, I've got one full-time guy. He's about 50-50 in landscaping, smaller cleanups and then mowing. Just wanting to grow, but I don't want to get bigger than that necessarily.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So like, the easy answer is, okay, if you're having a general manager, you're going to be looking at paying them probably $60,000 on minimum, maybe 50 in your area, depending on where you're at. Let's just call it
Okay.
$60,000. So if we can assume that
Okay.
each of our employees can bring in 100K, that's 400K, and then you got to subtract out the fact that you got overhead of this manager, right? So by the time you do, let's just
Hmm.
call it, let's say you're 25% profitable. That's $100,000 on 400K. Then you've got to take out the cost of that GM, right? So on the low end, I think
Hmm.
you could probably say you get 40 to 50K of distributions as an owner if you're not going to be there working.
Hmm.
And is that kind of your model? Is that you don't want to actually be doing any of the work?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'm just trying to look at, is that a good long-term option? Would it be worth doing?
Yeah,
If that makes
when you
sense.
start looking
Worth
at
scaling to that.
yeah, totally. Like if you're looking at it from the perspective of the owner not being involved at all, it just is going to have a lower ROI on that size of business because you don't have a very large revenue base, and that general manager is going to cost you a lot of money. Because if you, let's just say you were that general manager, well, now all of a sudden you take their $60,000 salary, tack on that $50,000 that we just said you're going to be taking distributions as the owner, and now you're making a six-figure kind of income if you are the owner operator, right? And keep in mind, the
Yep.
business isn't going to do that right off the bat, right? Like during that scaling process, there's going to take
Right.
capital requirements, finding the GM, all the rest of it. And so another way to do this, though, which is going to be more accurate, is really to actually look at how much in revenue each employee is going to do per hour. So $70. Let's just say that they are actually going to work full time year round. So 2,000 hours in the year, and let's say that they're 75%
Hmm.
efficient, which is kind of average. So let's just say that they complete 1,500 budget hours in the year. There's your $105,000 in gross revenue
Okay.
that employee should be making
Mhm.
for the business. Now, if you're doing project-based
Okay.
work and doing some landscaping, you're probably going to get more around 120 to 130 per employee because you're going to have a cost of product in there, right? So it's not necessarily going to drive a whole lot of margin, but in terms of the revenue, you might do more around that 500,000 level. If you're doing some, 50-50
Mhm.
projects, then you might drive more along that $60,000 to $70,000 in profit that you could take as distributions. But in my opinion, that's going to take at least 2 years to build the infrastructure and the team, the general manager, getting them in place, as well as making sure that you actually have pricing all at correct levels to where they're making 1,500 budget hours per year is being completed by each employee.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good. It's amazing how you can spit all that out.
Yeah, like the big thing, when as soon as you bring a GM in, you're just gonna bring your margins way down, right? And that's fine. When you start getting above 600,000, 700,000, that's when I really like the model of having a GM. Just keep in mind it's gonna be
Okay.
harder to find that GM. So your model is more a passive model that an owner would do, like myself, and that's the exact size that I'm looking for. 500,000 or so, where that GM can have about 3 to 4 employees and it's really profitable, but it usually takes me into year 3 and 4 to get there because that GM's going to learn a lot about pricing. They've got to dial everything in exactly right, turn it into profit mode, reduce their close ratio, increase prices. And so as long as you're patient with it and you're looking at this more of like a passive investment, that's fine. But I see like even some people in the comments saying about it too, is like usually it becomes more profitable from an owner's perspective. If you're hitting 700, 800 to $1 million in annual revenue and then getting a GM, because you can afford their overhead. And now, they're $70,000, $80,000 even in salary isn't a big dent against $1 million versus that against 400,000 is potentially the majority of your profits.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to do this part time first, so I'm just kind of strategizing.
Yeah,
So
like what I would do if I
that
was
makes
you, what I would do if I was you is basically keep growing it part-time like you are. And then if you find an employee that you think could become a GM, that's when you potentially have some dry powder where you are ready to deploy to growing. I would be very patient because it doesn't sound like you're in a big rush to make this happen, right? So if you have another job
no.
and you're kind of doing this on the side, I would keep doing that, but then go out and hire, go through guys. But when you find someone, you're like, okay, if I don't have a GM position for this person to move into, I'm going to lose them. and their long-term thinking, and maybe you give them a percentage of profits, that's when it would be the time when I personally would be like, yes, let's do it. Because if you try to force this to happen, what's probably going to happen, seeing that you've never hired a GM before and you don't have the systems in place to train them, is it a lot of times is going to be pretty difficult. So I would wait for a great hire to pop along, and it's like, okay, I have to get this person to be my GM or else I'm going to lose them. And they're the person that I believe could be the kind of the cultural standard for the next 3 or 4 employees, and scaling it up to 4.